All right, excellent. Last lesson we looked at the reasons why the United States got involved in Vietnam. So can somebody summarize some of those points before we move on to the turning point and the end? Why did the US get involved in Vietnam? Mate?
They were already involved a bit from the beginning because the French used to be.
They were supporting the French too.
The French used to be
Colonial masters. Yeah.
No,
They were the colonizing power, yes.
they were the colonizing powers in Vietnam, and Vietnam wanted freedom. So America was on France's side and was kind of just trying to help them keep everything in order.
Yeah, particularly because of anti-communism. Yeah, because in the north, all right, and they signed the Geneva Accords, and so because of that, the United States realizes at Geneva that if there's an election between North and South, they've been split. Ho Chi Minh and the communists would win. They don't really want to do that, so they then go back to support the government of Vietnam. So we've got two main reasons. All right, one is the domino theory. If it falls to communism, then that's going to spread around the world. That's why they got involved with that. So this is your classic containment example. All right, they've lost in the north, now they're going to go into the south. Today we're going to see the Tet Offensive. All right, this is the turning point in the Vietnam War. We're going to see why it was the turning point. Going back, what was the key moment for the US involvement?
2nd and 4th of August.
What happened?
The USS Maddox reported that it had been attacked on the 2nd of August, and on the 4th of August, two ships, the USS Maddox and the Turning Joy, both reported being attacked.
Yeah, and that was called what incident?
The Gulf.
Gulf of Tonkin. Yeah, the Gulf of Tonkin incident. So that's what really pushes them in, the Gulf of Tonkin incident. All right. So, Tet. Anybody know what Tet is? In this case, it's only just passed. It was the Chinese version of it at the weekend.
This?
No, I'm just scratching my voice.
Okay.
Yeah. So what do you think, Tet? Any guesses? No. Tet. It's a Vietnamese word.
I think we did this in Mr. Motto's class, right?
I have no memory of it.
It's New Year. All right. It's over New Year. So Tet is the Vietnamese New Year. All right. Happens around January time, full moon. Generally, you start an offensive. Why do you think some countries start an offensive during holidays, like the Tet Offensive, Yom Kippur War, Arab states invaded Egypt in 73 on the Jewish holy day? Why do people tend to attack other countries on holidays?
Because that's when they kind of like are at the weakest because they're all home or they're enjoying
Yeah,
themselves.
absolutely. That's when people are going to be preoccupied by being at home. All right. So, what was it first? Now you don't need to. This I will share with you later. I've done this over the weekend, but we need to establish what it was first. Okay. So this was a series of planned attacks by the Viet Cong. So that's the communist guerrillas in the south. They're southern Vietnamese who are communists, and the NVA, the North Vietnamese Army, all right, across South Vietnam. This is the biggest military campaign of the war by either side up until then, all right. Now remember, the North Vietnamese beat the French in one big battle at the Bien Phu. This is their kind of thinking we can do the same thing countrywide. So they attack everywhere. Their idea is that they would attack particularly in the cities, all right, where up to this date they've only been sort of minor, and generally they've been rural based, and this would create a popular uprising which would overthrow the government of Vietnam and kick the Americans out. All right, so this is a big operation. I've put in here, it starts in the early morning of the 31st. Actually, there's some premature ones on the 30th as well. We've got 80,000 North Vietnamese and Viet Cong troops attacking 100 towns, 36 out of 44 capitals, 5 out of 6 administrative cities, 72 out of 245 district towns, and the capital Saigon. Right? This is big. This is huge. This is massive. Now, at the start, in military terms, the United States and their allies, South Vietnamese, they're stunned, taken completely by surprise. Hue, which is the old traditional capital, is captured by the Viet Cong, but they eventually fought back, and this is a military victory. This is a great victory for the United States. They absolutely wipe out the Viet Cong. The Viet Cong essentially ceases to exist. Your kind of expectations of the Vietnam War being winning by, these chaps here with straw hats and black pajamas, them winning the war, that's a false narrative. That didn't happen because they were defeated at Tet Offensive. So we should all be going, well, hey, this in an alternate timeline is where we're saying this is how the United States won the war in Vietnam. Because militarily they do. Militarily they do. This is everything the United States wanted to happen. They wanted to fight a set-piece battle. And they do. They fight in Saigon. Hue I've talked about. Quai Son I've talked about. These are some of the key events that take place during the Tet Offensive. The Battle of Hue goes on for a couple of months. Quai Son started before and carries on afterwards. These are all massive victories, military victories for the United States. The United States has got the biggest and most powerful armed forces. You go at the United States toe to toe, you are going to lose, which is what happens here. So the big question in your mind is, how come, and we'll come on to this later, this turns into a defeat. Key events do we have? The Battle of Saigon, this is the capital city. There's actually people who go in, Viet Cong, go inside the US Embassy and start a fight. They're all shot later, but they go inside the US Embassy. Let's just have a thought moment. Why might that be a bad thing? What does that sort of show?
Maybe it shows that the Americans have it exposes a weak point in the American defense, that their embassies, that they put their military power everywhere else except for places like embassies or
Yeah, absolutely.
political places.
Totally. Your embassy should be the most secure place in the entire country for Americans. It's where the ambassador is, right? It should be the most secure. It's where the president stays. It should be the most secure place. And here you are. You've got dudes running around shooting machine guns. All right. This does not look good. And what we're going to look at here, and we'll come on to, is the difference between perception and reality. We then have the public execution of Ven Lem, which I'll show you in a second. We have the Battle of Hue, goes on for 2 months, the ancient capital. Huge set-piece, World War II style battle. Again, the United States win that war. We should talk about that there was a massacre. When the communists captured Hue, they killed tens of thousands of people. The Battle of Quai Son was up on the frontier. All right, another huge American victory. The Americans withdraw, saying they don't need it. When I gave you that trick question about name a battle that the Americans lost in Vietnam, the closest you could probably get to is Quai Son. But was it a withdrawal because they had to or because they wanted to?
Because they wanted.
They say because they wanted to. It's 6 of one, half dozen the others, but that's the closest to a battle where they lose. All right. The public execution in Saigon, and Saigon's the capital city. Again, should be the safest place. So the U.S. Embassy should be the safest place within the safest city. All right. And then we have. I thought I had the other thing. There we go. We go on to that. So this is. Oh, I'll go back. So turning military victory into defeat. All right. Hubris before nemesis. What did I say hubris was?
Right? I mean, no. Overconfidence.
Overconfidence. And what did I say nemesis was?
A person who's specifically designed to destroy you.
Yeah, and the personification of this nemesis will be Tet Offensive. All right. So the U.S. in 1967, at the end of 1967, the administration, and remember 1968 is a general election year, presidential election year, and in 1967 Lyndon Johnson's ready up for re-election. All right, he's looking really keenly at that. But there's a problem. The Vietnam War is becoming increasingly unpopular. It's not a majority unpopular. But it's gone from around the teens to about 30%, late big 30s, late 40s. That is going to be a stalemate. We're not winning. So they've got this problem at the end of 1968. So how do they address this problem? Well, they go on what's called like a success offensive. They start telling the media, and therefore the people, everything is going brilliantly in Vietnam. The news media was given lots of stories, Congress was given lots of stories about to create this wave of optimism. Here we've got Robert McNamara doing regular press conferences, looking at his map and saying how well they've done. They use statistical indicators like kill ratios and body counts. All right, the vice president said, we're beginning to win this struggle. We're on the offensive. Territory is being gained. We're making progress. He said that in mid-November. The pacification chief in Saigon says the program's succeeding. 68% of South Vietnam population, South Vietnamese population is under the control. Just 17% under the Viet Cong. Westmoreland, who was the general in charge, one of his commanders says, the Viet Cong has been defeated. He can't get food. He can't recruit. He's been forced to change his strategy from trying to control the people on the coast to trying to survive in the mountains. The military commander, General Westmoreland, on the 21st of November, said at the end of 1967, the communists were, quote, unable to mount a major offensive. I am absolutely certain that whereas in 1965 the enemy was winning, today he is certainly losing. We have reached an important point where the end comes into the view. Why is this going to be a problem? Because the Tet Offensive happens a couple of days later. So how do these people look?
They look like they've been lying, and they're all like, listen, we're doing so well, but in the background they're just kind of pathetically flailing around. It looks like that.
They're either lying or they're incompetent. All right, actually they're incompetent. All right, but it looks like they're lying. All right, so this is expectations versus reality, and it's this expectations versus reality that turns this victory, this military victory, into a political defeat. It was everything that they wanted. It was a military engagement that they would fight and win, which they did. But because they had been saying, yes, everything is fine, everything is going well, we're winning, they can't conduct an offensive, and then suddenly, and I'll show you some news from Saigon in just a second, on the front pages of every newspaper, on the daily news, you can see that it looks ridiculous. Hence this cartoon. Alright? Vietnamese information, that's Westmoreland there. Alright? As I was saying about the pacification and security program. Alright? What does that say? What is this cartoon saying? What does it say?
He's lying to everyone despite the reality.
Well, it's saying the reality is completely different to his words. He's covered, he's shredded, his papers are done. He's saying we've got this fantastic pacification and security program, and this is what we've got here. Actually, the reality is very different. So contrast what they were saying with this little clip here. This is from the news on the morning of the Tet Offensive.
Military police got back into the compound of the $2.5 million embassy complex at dawn. Before that, a platoon of Viet Cong were in control. The communist raiders never got into the main chancery building. A handful of Marines had it locked and kept them out. But the raiders were everywhere else. By daylight, where the embassy was located was a battleground. No one, unless identified, was allowed in the street. An Australian military policeman was standing guard, firing warning shots to keep the street clear. The bodies of 2 American military policemen who died as they tried to assault the compound lay near their jeep across the boulevard.
Does this look like you are winning a war?
Not really.
No. This is the problem.
This is where the Viet Cong raiders broke in. They sneaked up and blasted a hole in the reinforced concrete fence surrounding the compound. They had the big embassy wall to protect them. They were inside before anyone knew it. But none of the raiders lived to tell of their exploit. By 8 o'clock, 5 hours after they first broke in, almost all of them were dead. All in civilian clothes, they'd been armed with American M16 rifles and also rocket launchers and rockets. They had explosives, their purpose apparently to destroy the embassy. In that purpose, they did not succeed.
A villa on the embassy grounds was the residence of the mission coordinator, George Jacobson. He was trapped there on the second floor. American soldiers tossed him weapons to defend himself. Later, when it was all over, Jacobson told what had happened.
What could you see from your window? Were the VC in the buildings?
No, I did not see any VC in the building.
All right, so if we have some time at the end, we'll look at that, and I'll show it on the channel, on the management page. But you get the idea, no? This does not look like you're winning the war. When you say, "Hey everybody, we're winning, we're doing really really well," and then a few weeks later your embassy is under attack like that, nobody's going to trust you. This is called the credibility gap. You need to input that in, credibility gap, which is the difference between the credibility of what the army and the administration is saying compared to what reality is. And this credibility gap becomes huge now. People simply will not trust what the US military is saying. And then we also, on the same day, we have this very famous picture. Do you remember that sketch I showed you that says, "Are we the baddies?" about the Nazis in World War II? Do you remember I showed you that sketch? The German army, some of you I showed that anyway. So this is the picture that's kind of like, are we the baddies? So the guy with the gun, that's General Lone, alright, he's chief of the police. And the guy there is just about literally to get his head blown off in the next second. That's a member of the Viet Cong, Van Lim. He was probably did as well, guilty of assassinating a South Vietnamese colonel and 6 of his 7 children, his 8-year-old mother. All right, but you know, you're fighting for democracy and freedom, and live on TV, you just pick up a gun and shoot somebody. Right, this is yours. If you're the American public, this dude is on your side. So this starts asking the question, are we the baddies? Alright, and so this wins the 1969 Pulitzer Prize.
Sir,
Yes.
can you explain the credibility gap?
Yeah, credibility gap is, your credibility is how people trust what you say. Alright, so if there's a gap in your credibility, it means that people will stop trusting what you say. And so because the US military had been saying for so long, we're winning the war, we're winning the war, we're winning the war, suddenly with the Tet Offensive, it seems that their credibility is non-existent. Which means when they actually have the truth to tell, which is after the Tet Offensive, we're winning the war, which they are militarily, nobody believes them. So this is hubris because nemesis. They literally shoot themselves in the foot. And it's that credibility gap that's created. And that credibility gap, as we'll see some of the other reasons that happen, this feeds into the idea that the whole Vietnam War was a lie. Gulf of Tonkin was a lie. Let's look at some other things that were a lie as well. Alright? So, Richard Nixon comes to power. This is why we can't go too far and say, alright, Tet Offensive, after the Tet Offensive everybody wants to get out. Yes, they do. Alright, what Nixon wants, I didn't put this in there, I forgot, sorry, it's called peace with honour. Write that down. Alright, so Nixon comes in 1968, and remember, if you're soft on communism or you want peace and all of that sort of stuff, you don't necessarily vote for Richard Nixon. Alright, the most famous anti-communist in the United States. Sorry, I'm turning into Joe Biden. So he has peace with honour. I want to create peace with honour, and how we're going to have that peace with honour is a program of Vietnamization. And essentially what this is training the Vietnamese, the South Vietnamese, to take over the fighting on the ground so that you can therefore withdraw US ground troops. The Air Force will still stay there. Advisors will still stay there to train the South Vietnamese. But essentially it's to turn this from a US direct engagement into a civil war. Alright, and so the South Vietnamese will fight for themselves on the ground, but the US will still provide its air force. that's going to be significant. All right, so this is Richard Nixon's policy of Vietnamization. That's what he's elected to do, to end the war with peace and honor, and to bring in this process of Vietnamization. Okay, understand what Vietnamization is? So, this happens from the early 1970s. By 1972, by the beginning of 1972, over 400,000, so the vast majority of US personnel, most of which were combat troops, were withdrawn from Vietnam. Taking advantage of this, North Vietnam invades South Vietnam. Richard Nixon therefore organises the United States Air Force, and they just bomb the hell out of the North Vietnamese army. Alright, and so Operation Linebacker 1 and Linebacker 2 to bring them back to the campaigning table. Alright, so the North Vietnamese come in, they attack them from the air, and this is a conventional army. This is like North Korea invading South Korea. Alright, and then eventually they signed a peace treaty, and all US combat forces are withdrawn at the end of 1972, going into 73. Hurrah! Everything's ended peacefully. It's fine. But this is where the actions of the US Congress comes in, and why popular support just drains away for any kind of action. We have news of the My Lai massacre that comes out in 1968, again undermining the moral cause of the war. In 1970, Richard Nixon launches the invasion of Cambodia. In response for that, some students at Kent State University go and protest, and the National Guard goes in and shoots them. 1971, a guy called Daniel Ellsberg, who worked in the State Department for the last few years, he's been secretly getting lots of documents relating to US involvement in Vietnam, and he's been photocopying them, and then he releases them, leaks them as the Pentagon Papers in 1971. This cast doubt on things like the Gulf of Tonkin. It shows they don't really know what's going on. So all of these are directly Vietnam related. There are reasons why people start moving away from supporting the Vietnam War. The most important one, though, is going to be Watergate, which has nothing to do with Vietnam. You've heard about Watergate before. Have you got any ideas what Watergate is? We've sort of mentioned it in passing. No? Alright. So partly because of all of these leaks and stuff, the President Nixon sets up a group called CREEP, Campaign to Re-elect the President, and they set up a special group called the Plumbers to stop the leaks. Do you see? Plumbers to stop the leaks. CREEP, I don't know why they call it CREEP, alright? and so what they do, getting ready for the 1972 election, alright, re-election for Richard Nixon, is the Watergate building, which is a huge condominium, houses, within its one of many floors, is the Democratic National Committee. So Nixon's a Republican, the Democratic Party, they're kind of like HQ, their base is in the Watergate building, and some of these people break in twice actually. They get stopped, they get arrested by the police, and there's an investigation as to who these people are. Why are you breaking into the Democratic offices? There's a whole range of congressional hearings. Did Richard Nixon do it? He wins the 1972 election very easily. There's an investigation committee set up by Congress. They get tapes of Richard Nixon, everything that he says. He's going to be impeached. He will be on the edge of being impeached, which means that he's going to be thrown out of office. And rather than be impeached for these crimes of Watergate, he resigns. And his vice president, a guy called Gerald Ford, takes over. Now, what impact does this have on Vietnam? 2. 1, Richard Nixon makes the peace agreement. Richard Nixon knows what the peace agreement is, and a lot of it is, if you attack South Vietnam, Richard Nixon's going to go crazy, the old madman theory. Alright, Henry Kissinger's Secretary of State, I won't be able to control him, and he'll bomb you. Alright, just like what happened in 1972 with Linebacker 1 and Linebacker 2. So he personally has got this commitment to South Vietnam that he's not going to let them go, and he's going to authorize these bombings. After all of these things, there's a massive anti-war movement in Congress, which means that when in 1975 North Vietnam does what it did previously and invades the South Vietnam, the United States Congress does not provide additional aid. Without that additional aid, without particularly the use of the US Air Force, South Vietnam does not have a chance. And so the South Vietnamese army gradually collapses without US support. So this is when people say, there's one thing worse than being the United States enemy, being the United States friend. Alright, because they failed to support these people at the end. That's why there's a lot of bitterness about the Vietnam War, because they let their people go. And so you can see there tanks. So this is like a proper, I'm going to tell you in a second. Alright, so you've got the tanks. So this is this is the North Vietnamese army. This is a proper army. This is not men in black pajamas. Alright, this is a proper army that wins the Vietnam War. You can see that famous photograph at the bottom there that's the US Embassy in Saigon. They're flying as the North Vietnamese army is coming into Saigon. Anybody who has any connections to the United States knows that the communists are going to shoot them and their family, so they are desperate to leave. And so helicopters come in, helicopters go off from the embassy, taking away men, women and children, civilians, as many as possible who have any kind of connection with the United States. They then fly out off the coast where the United States Navy is, and all of these helicopters land. They don't have enough space for them, so they have to push them off. That's what they're doing in that picture. They're pushing off the helicopters. So many are landing, they can't take them back because by now Saigon's fallen, and they've got more helicopters coming in. They have to push the helicopters off. This is why Vietnam is seen as a massive humiliation for the United States, because this is what happens if you are a friend. It's very similar to what happened in Afghanistan a few years ago. Similar types of photographs at the Kabul airport when the United States pulled out. Not as bad, but it's similar to this. So, why was it defeated? April the 30th, 1975. Hey yo, I was 4 years old. 4 years old? 4 months old. So, number one, loss of popular support, particularly after the Tet Offensive. Right, they are losing popular support, but there's still lots of people support the Vietnam War. People still support it, otherwise they don't vote in Richard Nixon. They think Richard Nixon is probably the best one to end it, but they don't become all peacenik. But the Tet Offensive is that turning point for them. Secondly, this is probably the most important one that's always missed off because it's politically controversial, politically difficult. The US Congress doesn't support Vietnam in 1975. Had it done so, the result probably would have been the same as in 1973, because that's what happened in 1973-72, because of Watergate. So ironically, the Vietnam War is not lost in Vietnam. It's lost in America. I put 2, I don't know, I'm a silly person. I should have put 3. Fundamentally, they support an unpopular, dysfunctional regime. That's their major Achilles heel from the beginning. Right? They don't support a government that has popular support. They try and change that by shooting Diem, and they end up getting something worse. They end up with a guy called President Phuay, who's like a military dictator. It's still worse. So, there we go. Any questions about any of that? All right. So that's it. That's our containment done. All right. That's our containment done. We will have our pre-mock on Wednesday. All right, in our Wednesday lesson, and I will give you. I don't know what I'm going to give you for that yet. I think I'll probably give you questions on containment from a paper 1 stuff, but I will tell you what we're going to do tomorrow, and I will use tomorrow's lesson as a way to for you to revise. Okay, going through all of that then. So let's come up with some of the key reasons for containment. Somebody tell me what containment is, what it means, where it came from, and how it developed.
this, what it means, where it came from, whatever. Okay, so basically, what it is that it was a policy created by the Americans.
Which American?
Huh?
Which American? Well, who was president and who was the guy who came up with the idea in a telegram? Mr. X. President Truman. He originated it in his doctrine. Yeah.
Truman Doctrine.
Yeah,
and,
but it follows the idea of Mr. X, who is George
Kepler.
Kepler is kind of like redshift, no? Kennan.
Kennan.
Yeah, George Kennan.
I don't know why I can't remember his name. It was the idea that if they let communism be as it is, it'll spread throughout to Eastern Europe and even to Asia.
Mhm.
And so Eastern, Western Europe and even to Asia. So basically, containment was because containment was them trying to stop the spread of communism. It was not that they pushed communism back; they would just hold it where it is. So they tried to do this through the Truman Doctrine and through the Marshall Plan. The Truman Doctrine was military.
Political.
Was political, while the Marshall Plan was economical.
Yeah.
Marshall aid.
What becomes the first military one in Europe? Yeah. NATO. Excellent. Yeah. So political Truman Doctrine, economic Marshall aid, NATO, Europe. Right. So the policy is created based around a European perspective post-Cold War. All right, as Cold War starts, not post-Cold War. It then spreads. What does it spread to first? Not in Europe. It spreads outside Europe. What does it first come in? Which war? The Korean War. Explain.
The Korean main reason for the Korean War was first the domino theory and
No, let's rephrase. The main reason for the US involvement in the Korean War. So number one, domino theory. Go on, explain.
Number two theory was it needed to prove that the United Nations was better than the League of Nations, and so they would actually be successful. So they had to take action against North Koreans.
Yeah, okay, so we've got containment and action firstly, we've got Korean War, domino theory, one country will fall to communism, bum 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 bum, okay. Just like happened in Eastern Europe. So that's number one, that international context, and then we have the local context of actually this is one sovereign country invading another sovereign country. Linking Korean War to Vietnam War. The United States bombs North Vietnam. Why do you think they never... Because the obvious question is, just invade North Vietnam. Right? Why didn't the United States invade North Vietnam?
Because they learned, I'm not sure about this, but because they learned in Korea that while containment would work, rolling back would not work because there would be a retaliation.
By whom?
This communists.
Which communists in particular that shares a border? What do they?
China.
Yes, exactly, right. So they don't invade North Vietnam because one, they fear that it's going to provoke China into invading just what happened in Korea. So it's kind of like we stick here, yeah, we'll bomb, but we won't invade. Which is kind of holding one hand behind your back, all right? But their fear is that China's going to get involved directly. China is involved. There's obviously giving supplies, although that sort of changes later on because there's another Cold War dynamic when China moves away from the Soviet Union, and one of the things that Nixon does is he's with his State Department. Foreign Secretary Kissinger is move China away from the Soviet Union. He sees it as like a tripartite world, and so actually China stops supporting Vietnam. And actually in 1979, 1980, China will invade Vietnam. They also lose. So you've got to say, fair play to Vietnamese, right? They've beaten the United States and they've beaten China in like a decade. Fair play. That's quite lesson. Don't invade Vietnam, you're not going to win. All right. So then we have that U.S. involvement in Vietnam, as we discussed at the beginning. All right. We've got the idea of containment. We've got the Gulf of Tonkin incident. Okay. And then we have the turning point of the Tet Offensive, which was a military victory but a political defeat. Lack of support, added to by the collapse of Nixon's government administration because of Watergate, means there's no appetite for intervention when in 1975 the North Vietnamese invade South Vietnam. And voila. Any other questions?
Was it actually Nixon who did the Watergate thing?
I mean, personally, no. Did he oversee it? A little bit, but the worst thing he did, he covered it up. It's where the phrase like the cover up is worse than the crime. The fact that he covered up about it and lied about it, and then was on tape lying about it, that really destroyed his credibility, and that was why he did. And because of that, he sort of like broke the law, so much so that his Attorney General resigned, and that's the government's law officer says no, I'm not going to get involved anymore. All right, so. Yeah, but he covered up and he said there must be no whitewash. Wait, speaking like Winston Churchill, I don't know. He said there must be no whitewash at the White House. Americans should trust their president, that the president's not lying. Kind of problem was he was. And ironically, this is the big irony, he had absolutely no need to, because in 1972 he was very popular. You saw he pretty much won every single state. All right. He had so much leeway, he was going to win that election very easily. He had no need to do any of this. But he becomes this massive recluse. He feels though he's on attack by everybody, by all sides. And just retreats into himself, this brooding Shakespearean personality up late at night, sitting in his armchair in the darkness of the White House, just sitting in his armchair, just with his list of names of all the people he hates and wants to get back. He's this great figure of tragedy by this point. But also, I think probably one of the most human and normal of any American president. This is a guy who comes from a very, very poor background, comes from poverty. All right, grew up with an alcoholic father and a single mother, basically. And brought his family up. I think his brother might have died when he was younger as well. So he felt he was always against the system. I find him, popular narrative is that Kennedy's the sympathetic character, and Nixon's like the evil genius. I actually swapped them over. Kennedy is a man of privilege who uses that for various shenanigans and abuses his power. Nixon's a guy who comes up from poverty and tries to make his own way in the world, is like that self-made man. And then, Kennedy dies in heroic circumstances. He gets shot, so you're never able to see his decline, whereas Nixon goes very publicly down for in a like I say, in a Shakespearean way. He's a very Shakespearean character. Anyway, sorry, that's overtaken the lesson. Any questions before you go? No? All right. Tomorrow we'll use as a bit of a revision. I'll give you a heads up about what we're going to do for the test, and then on Wednesday is the exam.